Hello, my name is Peter Panagor. I was born in Massachusetts in the town of Marlborough, and I grew up in a loving family. My father was an architect, my mother a nurse, and together they created a home filled with affection and safety. I had siblings and an ordinary childhood until something happened that changed everything forever. My older sister Andrew was my best friend. I admired her and always wanted to be close to her. But one day, coming home from school, I found a note on the kitchen table. She had run away from home. I was only 14 years old, and I didn't really understand what was happening. All I knew was that from that moment on, our family would never be the same again. My father was desperate. He traveled across the country searching for her, visited towns, and asked questions, but couldn't bring her back. Her absence left a hole in our home. Before that, we had a strong and united family. We celebrated together, had close cousins, took part in parties, and cooked family recipes. But after Andrew left, everything fell apart. The atmosphere at home changed completely. A sadness overwhelmed my parents. It seemed the sparkle in their eyes had disappeared, and I just wanted to run away too. I felt I needed to find a new direction for my life, something that could pull me out of that house full of silence and nostalgia. That's why, as soon as I had the chance, I left. I wanted to drop out of school, but my parents wouldn't allow it. Instead, they convinced me to try a student exchange program. And that's how years later, I found myself in Montana, a place that would change my life forever. When I arrived in Montana, a new world opened up to me. It was a wild place filled with towering mountains, icy rivers, and a sky so vast it seemed endless. I fell in love with nature and threw myself into every adventure that came my way. I signed up for the National Ski Patrol, joined the outdoor sports club, and spent my time exploring the mountains whenever I could. I learned how to survive in extreme cold, how to climb, and how to camp in the snow. The more time I spent outdoors, the more I felt that it was truly where I belonged. In the spring, I noticed a flyer on the club's bulletin board. A guy named Tim was organizing an 8-day ski expedition in the Canadian backcountry, followed by a day of ice climbing. It sounded like the perfect adventure. I called him right away and found out he hadn't yet found a partner. When we met, we realized our skills complemented each other well. I knew how to handle emergencies because I was part of the ski patrol and he was a trained climber. I had camped in winter before, and so had he. We decided we made a good team and could take on this challenge together. Then, we got in the car and headed to Canada. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. We skied through incredible landscapes, dug out shelters in the snow to sleep in, and faced some intense challenges. On our first night, we nearly froze, but managed to warm up using our survival skills. Trust between us grew quickly. However, the real test was still ahead, the day of ice climbing. This was completely new to me. I had climbed mountains before, used ropes, and done mountaineering, but I had never faced an ice wall. What I didn't realize at that moment was that this climb would change everything for me. The day of the climb arrived, and I quickly realized I wasn't fully prepared. I had mountaineering experience but had never climbed real ice. Even worse, I didn't have the ideal gear. I had to improvise by borrowing whatever I could and used an ice axe and a hammer instead of the 2 axes that were recommended. The problem with the axe was that I could plant it in the ice and let go with one hand to rest. With the hammer, I had to hold it the whole time, which made everything much more tiring. Despite that, I felt confident. Tim agreed we should give it a try, and we started the ascent. The beginning was easy, but soon my arms began to burn. The constant effort of holding the hammer made my muscles tire much faster than I expected. This set us back significantly, and while other teams were already descending, we were still climbing. Time was passing, and I felt increasingly exhausted. But climbing demanded complete focus. There was no room to think about the past or the future, only the next move, the exact placement of my feet and hands. The sound of the wind, the ice cracking beneath our gear, the tension in every step, all of it kept me fully immersed in the moment. Finally, after an immense effort, we reached the summit. But there was a problem. The sun was already setting. Many other teams were well on their way down, and we had taken too long. At that moment, we realized we were in serious trouble. The challenge with ice climbing is that you can't just turn around and descend like you would on a regular trail. The only way down was to follow the technical descent route, which involved horizontal sections, rappelling, and minor climbs. But now, with night approaching and the cold intensifying, every minute counted. That's when we understood we weren't prepared for what lay ahead. As soon as the sun slipped below the horizon, the cold became a real enemy. Within minutes, the temperature plunged. I can't say by how many degrees, but it felt like everything around us was rapidly freezing. The wind cut through us like blades of ice, and our bodies began shivering uncontrollably. Hypothermia was setting in fast. My teeth were chattering like in a cartoon, my muscles trembling, and my hands so numb that gripping was a struggle. I recognized what was happening from my experience with ski patrol. I knew that if we didn't move quickly, our bodies would start shutting down. The problem was we were hundreds of meters up, stuck on an ice and rock wall in complete darkness. We had to make a quick decision. There was no time to sit and wait for the worst to happen. If we stayed where we were, we would freeze to death. But we couldn't just descend haphazardly. Without proper planning, even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Tim pulled on the rope to begin preparing the descent, but due to the cold and extreme fatigue, he made a mistake. Instead of organizing the rope properly, he yanked it carelessly, and it ended up completely tangled. This was a serious problem. Every second wasted meant our energy was draining even more. In the darkness, shivering from the cold, with fingers nearly numb, we started crossing to the first rappel point. Our metal gear clanged, and each step required immense effort. The cold was so intense that even talking became difficult. My jaw trembled so much that I struggled to form words. When we finally reached the first rappel point, we realized we hadn't brought the safety strap needed to secure the rope to the tree. To save money, we had decided to leave behind this essential equipment. So instead of following the correct procedure, we simply threw the rope around the trunk and descended like that, believing we could remove it later. This was a terrible mistake. We descended the first section, but when I tried to pull the rope to free it and move to the next point, it wouldn't budge. I pulled again, nothing. Tim tried with me, still nothing. We were stuck in the middle of the descent in the dark, freezing, with no ropes to continue. At that moment, I realized our situation was far worse than we had imagined. The cold kept intensifying, and our strength was fading rapidly. We could no longer go back, but we couldn't keep descending either. The situation was critical. There we were, trapped midway down, unable to free the rope and without an escape plan. The cold was becoming brutal, and I could barely feel my hands. My body shook so much that maintaining balance was difficult. We had to make a decision. If we didn't act quickly, we wouldn't survive. So Tim took a risky initiative. He decided to try climbing back up to free the rope with his own hands. But there was a problem. He would have to climb without any protection. I lay down on the ground and used my body weight to tension the rope, creating an anchor point for him to climb. I held on as he ascended, each movement incredibly difficult. Then suddenly, I heard the thing I feared most. "I'm falling." Before I could react, he came tumbling down. I instinctively rolled to the side, bracing for impact, but luckily he landed directly in the soft snow and wasn't hurt. Amid our fear, we realized something incredible had happened. His fall had finally freed the rope. Fate was on our side. We had a second chance. With cheers of relief, we continued our descent. We were exhausted, but we knew we couldn't stop. The cold was creeping in more and more, and our bodies were already nearing their limits. We pushed on and reached a spot where the mountain was no longer ice, but simply rock. This gave us a false sense of security. Ahead of us were two iron pythons anchored into the stone, with metal loops and carabiners to secure the rope. It was a training spot, one of the few places set up for a safe descent. If we could just get down there, we'd be one step from safety. Carefully, I attached one end of the rope to my gear and tossed the other end over the edge, preparing for the rappel. But the moment I pulled on the rope to start my descent, something went wrong. The rope got stuck somewhere out of our sight. I pulled hard, nothing. I tried again, still nothing. I looked at Tim, and he understood immediately. We were stuck once more, and this time there was no way back. The cold was already setting in. My mind felt slower and slower, as if it was shutting down bit by bit. I knew hypothermia was advancing rapidly. My hands were no longer responding well, my vision was starting to blur, and the exhaustion was overwhelming. The rope remained stuck. We tried pulling it every way we could, but it wouldn't budge. Tim looked at me, and I saw the same fear in his eyes that I felt myself. There was no way out. That's when it happened. Instead of panicking, I felt a deep calm wash over me. It was as if my body knew it was coming to an end, and rather than fight, it simply accepted it. I remembered an old movie I'd watched years ago, Little Big Man, starring Dustin Hoffman. There was an old man who'd come out of his tent every day and say, "Today is a good day to die." Those words echoed in my mind. I looked up at the sky, and it had never seemed so beautiful. The stars sparkled with colors I'd never noticed before. They varied in size and brightness, as if each one was unique. The snow around us reflected the mountain light, and far below I could hear the river flowing. Everything was unbelievably beautiful. Then something even stranger happened. Suddenly, I began to feel warm. It was a deep warmth coming from inside my body, as if the cold had vanished. I knew this was one of the last signs of hypothermia. People who die from cold are often found without their clothes because they feel so warm at the end that they start taking them off. Tim saw me unzip my coat and shouted, "No! Zip that up right now, you're losing it!" But I didn't listen. The warmth felt so real that it seemed impossible that I was dying from cold. My mind began to slow down even more, and I started to drift off. But it wasn't ordinary sleep, like lying in bed and pulling a blanket over yourself. It was as if a curtain suddenly fell, and I was just switching off, and then it happened. This time when I closed my eyes, there wasn't just darkness. I remained conscious. I was still myself, but my body had disappeared. I no longer felt the cold, the wind, or the pain, only an absolute void. But at the same time, I was there. It didn't make sense, I thought. Where is the mountain? Where is my body? Why am I still here? That's when I noticed something in the distance. A small light appeared out of the darkness, a tiny bright point far away, like a very distant star. And suddenly, it started moving toward me. This little light grew rapidly. It was moving at an impossible speed, much faster than anything I'd ever seen. The strangest part was that I felt it knew exactly who I was, before I could even think I was surrounded by this light. But it wasn't just brightness. It was a presence, a powerful, immense presence, as if it held all the knowledge of the universe. Yet at the same time, it felt familiar, like something I'd known forever. Somehow, without words, this presence communicated a message to me. I am taking you with me. At that moment, I knew I had no choice. This force was far greater than anything I could resist. But still, I tried. No, I'm not going, I thought with all my strength. But fighting that light was like trying to hold back a giant wave with my hands. I was insignificant compared to it. Then, as if a door had opened, I was pulled inside something I can only describe as a cascade of light. But this light was no ordinary light. It had colors I had never seen before, brilliance that doesn't exist in the physical world. It was mesmerizing, beautiful, impossible to put into words. In that moment, all my fear vanished. All I wanted was to surrender to it. Then something unexpected happened. Before fully entering the light, I was taken to another place, and there I experienced something that deeply affected me. I felt all the pain I had ever caused others, every harsh word I had ever spoken, every time I hurt someone, every bad attitude. I felt it all from the other person's perspective. It was as if for a moment I became each of them and felt the sadness I had caused, but at the same time I realized something. There was no judgment. The light, this immense presence, wasn't there to judge or punish me. It simply revealed who I truly was. Then, I was taken even further. Suddenly, I could see the entire universe, not just the Earth, but the galaxies, the stars, everything. I realized there was so much more than we can imagine. There were other universes, other worlds, each part of something greater, something beyond words. Amid all this, I saw the Earth from afar. I saw all the people, and each one without exception carried within them a golden light. It was as if every person held a fragment of that divine presence but was unaware of it. Then, the guiding voice said something that echoed deep within me. All are my beloved. In that moment, I understood that God's love is infinite. It isn't reserved for a chosen few. It doesn't depend on what a person believes or does. It's for everyone, without exception. Then, a thought suddenly came to me, about my parents. In that instant, I saw their faces. I saw all the suffering they had already endured from losing my sister. If I died, then they would suffer even more. So for the first time I asked God a question. Should I leave? The answer came immediately. Why? Your parents have already lost your sister. If you leave now, they won't be able to bear it. At that very moment, I was pulled away from that vision of the universe. It was as if I was being taken back somewhere. Then I realized I had a choice before me. Countless doors appeared, each representing a path, a different life. The voice simply said, "Choose." Each door seemed to lead to a different existence. It was as if I'd reached a crossroads where I could choose a new way to live. I could walk through any of those doors and start over, but at the same time, I felt the presence of the divine voice around me. It wrapped me in an endless love and, without using words, made it clear that the most important thing wasn't the life I would choose, but who I would choose to be. The voice told me, "Choose, but choose the light." For a moment I felt torn. A part of me wanted to choose the light, to fully surrender to it, but another part still longed to be who I was, to hold on to some freedom, to live with autonomy. So I did something I can't quite explain. I made a choice, but not completely, toward the light. I chose a door that was slightly outside that pure brilliance. I wanted to keep a bit of my identity, a piece of myself. And the moment I made that decision, I was pulled back in. The descent was swift and intense, as if I was being pushed through an energy tunnel. Suddenly I was forced back into my body. It was a terrible feeling. If before I had felt free, expanded part of something enormous, now I was compressed into a tiny space. It was like being a genie shoved back into a bottle. All the pain came rushing back, the cold, the weight of my body, the limits of matter. Then I heard a cry, "You were dead. My God, you were dead." I opened my eyes and saw Tim. He was crying and trembling, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. I still couldn't grasp what had happened. My body ached, my head was spinning, and I felt strange, as if I were in two places at once, apart. of me was still connected to that other world, to that light. Tim was desperately pulling me, tugging on the rope. My mind was still partly elsewhere, but I obeyed. I grabbed the rope and pulled. This time, it came free easily, as if it had never been stuck. Without wasting a second, we descended as quickly as possible. We were shaking, exhausted to our limits. When we finally reached the campsite, we went into the tent and did everything we could to regain our body heat. We boiled water, sipped slowly, wrapped ourselves in sleeping bags, and waited for the sunrise. I survived, but I knew I would never be the same again. The next day, as we headed home, the world around me felt different. The rising sun on the horizon, the fields along the road, the clouds in the sky. Everything seemed unreal. It was as if I were seeing the earth for the first time. Having experienced something far greater, I felt trapped in a world of shadows and distorted images. The brilliance and light I had witnessed in that experience was so much more vivid that, by comparison, life here seemed pale. That's when I realized I no longer fully belonged to this world. After that night in the mountains, I was never the same again. Something inside me had changed forever. I had died and come back, but the problem was, I couldn't tell anyone about it. In the car, while we were heading home, Tim talked about how we had nearly died, the unbearable cold, the danger we had faced, but I stayed silent. I wanted to share what had happened. I wanted to say that I had left my body, entered the light, seen the entire universe, and felt infinite love. But how could I explain something like that? Who would believe me? So, I chose to remain silent. For years, I kept all this to myself. The world around me seemed different. The colors appeared less vibrant. The sound seemed muffled. It was as if I were trapped in a smaller, less intense reality than the one I had known. But the hardest part was coping with the longing. I wanted to go back. Every day that longing revealed itself to me. I wondered, why am I here? Why didn't I stay in the light? I wasn't afraid of death. On the contrary, I wanted to die, but at the same time I knew my life had a purpose. I chose to return, so I had to find a reason to be here. I began seeking answers. I read everything I could about spirituality, philosophy, and the world's religions. I studied great thinkers, from the writings of India to the poets and mystics of the West. I wanted to understand what had happened to me. But in the end, the only thing that truly mattered was what I already knew, the meaning of life and love. What I had learned in the light was simple. We all carry that divine spark within us. We are all loved, regardless of what we do or don't do, and this truth completely changed the way I saw people. I began to see the light inside everyone. This doesn't mean life has become easy. I still have moments of pain. I still face challenges. But now, I know that everything is part of something greater. Every day I repeat to myself the phrase I heard in a movie years ago, "Today is a good day to die." Not because I want to die, but because I know where I'll go when my time comes. I understand that no one leaves this life alive, but I also know that death is not the end. Life continues, and one day we will all return home. The end of one journey and the beginning of a new life. Surviving this experience has given me a new perspective on life, death, and everything beyond what we can see. I've learned that death is not the end, but a return home. I've learned that each of us carries a divine spark inside us, a fragment of that immense light I witnessed. And in the end, what truly matters isn't what we've conquered or the titles we hold, but the love we leave in the world. This journey has taught me that we are here for a purpose, and that even in the toughest times, something greater is guiding us. Life is a fleeting adventure, but what we truly are is eternal. If this story has touched you in any way or made you reflect on life and what lies beyond, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Thank you so much for being here, and remember, one day we will all return home.